It's UofL Today on 93.9 The Ville. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
And welcome to UofL Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Ville. So glad you're joining us. I always like to tell folks when they're listening to the show, they'll be a little smarter by the time they're done listening to this program. You'll know a little bit more about the University of Louisville, some of the great programs, the faculty, and the research, and even some students that go to UofL and their stories. So we're going to be having a action-packed 30 minutes here. So in just a minute, we'll be discussing a pretty big controversy, Confederate symbols in the U.S. and how they fit into modern society. But let me tell you what else is coming up just a little bit later in the show. Brain surgeons now have a way to get CAT scans of your brain in real time while you're in the middle of brain surgery. We'll talk to a doctor about why that's a big deal. And Peter Morin was the director of the Speed Art Museum for 21 years, but now he's working on building art partnerships between the community and UofL students, and we'll see what he's up to. But first, you know the controversies over the Confederate flag and other symbols of Old Dixie. What about the Jefferson Davis statue in Frankfort, or the statues that honor Confederate soldiers in Kentucky? Are those symbols of slavery and racism, or just American history? Dan Vivian is a history professor here at UofL, and he's here to talk about it because he studied these things a little bit. Dan, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
All right. This is a controversial subject, as you well know, and I'm sure you've weighed in with some of your students on this, but the Confederate flag, the big controversy out there about the Confederate flag, should it be taken down? Should we quit selling items of the Confederate flag that have the Confederate flag on them? What's your sense in modern times? Is that just a outdated thing that is a symbol of racism and we just need to get rid of it? Or is it part of our history that we need to embrace?
Great question.
Sorry, I put you on the spot with the first question, didn't I?
As you should. So great question. A lot of different answers.
Okay.
I mean, first of all, just to address the issue of it being the Confederate flag, it's never the national flag of the Confederacy. Now, it takes on that status soon after the Civil War. It's actually the battle flag of Northern Virginia during the war. Many different battle flags used during the war years, but soon after the Civil War, it becomes an emblem of the South at large. And John Korski, one of the historians that's written a lot about this subject, calls it the second national flag, right? I mean, this becomes an emblem of the South, and it's not particularly controversial for a long time, largely because Jim Crow keeps those controversies under wraps, right? African Americans don't have much standing in the South after the Civil War, especially after the end of Reconstruction, and so public controversy is essentially non-existent. In contemporary society, I mean, there's no way to disaggregate the Confederate flag from its history, which involves a very virulent and forthright defense of slavery and white supremacy. And since the 60s, since the Civil Rights era, the flag has often been invoked by groups that are showing resistance to federal authority, particularly over racial issues. So, for instance, during the Civil Rights era, one of the first instances that the flag is used in that context is by Southerners protesting the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, which overturned the legal basis for segregation. Now, at the same time, it also becomes a sort of national symbol of rebelliousness, of individuality, of refusing to adhere to federal authority. So it's a very, very complicated history, and that continues to play out, and that's one of the reasons it still has resonance today. What do you do about it? I have no idea, right?
You're not a politician. I guess you don't have to know that, right?
Thankfully, I'm not a politician. I never prescribe to have the answers for our society as a whole, but look, the reason it is a controversy and we're debating these things is that the flag is central to questions about race, questions about federal versus state authority, questions that are still central to American society today. And as to what happens to all these symbols and what the appropriate thing to do with them is, this is a story that's playing out and it's going to continue to be ongoing for some time.
We're talking with Dan Vivian, who's a history professor at the University of Louisville. Well, let's talk about that bigger picture. You mentioned that there, Confederate symbols, there are all sorts of them. We've got here close to the UofL campus, there's a monument to a Confederate soldier in the middle of 3rd Street. You got the Jefferson Davis Monument in Frankfort in the Rotunda, the Capitol building. Do those have a place are they history again, or are they a poor symbol? I mean, do they have a place, I guess, in our modern culture? Or would, if we tore them down, would we be guilty of doing the same thing that's happened in Iraq and Syria, where they've just torn down historical things and torn them up?
Yeah. So I think they do have a place in our modern culture, and part of the role they're playing in inspiring controversy and debate is, I think, pretty healthy. I mean, this is what discussion about the history of a democracy looks like. Many different viewpoints, many competing viewpoints, no clear recipe for what the most appropriate thing to do. Many historians, when this debate started last summer after the tragic shooting in Charleston, were very concerned that the immediate response was going to be removal and movement to museums, right? And this would somehow take these symbols out of public controversy, and we'd therefore lose a teachable moment, a moment when Americans might better understand their history. I don't think at this point there's any concern about that, because there's been so many different solutions proposed. There are so many of these monuments and memorials throughout the nation, and then what people decide is the most appropriate thing to do with them continues to vary tremendously. So I think debate in this case is really quite healthy, even if it's a sign of very, very divergent viewpoints.
Right. Is it irrational, as you put it, there are these, Gettysburg, I don't know how many monuments there are to Confederate soldiers at Gettysburg. I mean, is it irrational to think that if it's a monument to the war dead, like we have here close to the UofL campus, that it's, that's just, to me personally, that's a little different than the symbol of the Confederate flag and those things. That these folks were Americans, they fought in a war. We're honoring their death. We're not saying, what their views were, what they were fighting for. We're just saying that we're honoring their death. Is that different than, flying a Confederate flag in your front yard and kind of an in-your-face kind of thing?
Many people would say it is. I don't think, by the same token, it's hard to understand why some people, particularly African Americans, would find those symbols offensive, because, wars are fought for particular causes. And, that cause for the Confederacy involved a defense of slavery and white supremacy.
Right.
It's an important history, and I think a history that deserves real attention in contemporary society, because we're one of the few societies that undergoes a very bloody, very costly civil war, and yet we allow the losers to honor their sacrifice and their cause in a way that makes it incredibly prominent. This is a very unusual story, and it's a story that has to do mainly with the desire to reunite the Union, even if it came at the expense of black civil rights. That's the large picture story that plays out in the half century after emancipation, and one that we're still dealing with the legacy thereof today.
So your overall view on this is what I'm hearing, not want to put words in your mouth, is that the discussion has been good, but there is a place for some Confederate symbols in modern times, but if they're seen as historical things and not offensive to other people. Is that a fair assessment?
I think there are possibilities there. I mean, not everybody's going to agree with that. It does seem to me that we as a society would lose something if all Confederate symbols were removed. One of the proposals that's been tendered in quite a few cases is not to remove, but to add educational materials, interpretive media that tells different sides of the story. And in part, that's what's happened here at Freedom Park, here right beside the UofL campus. Our late Dean Hudson, who was a distinguished scholar of African-American history and Kentucky history, he developed the interpretive media around the park that celebrates African-American accomplishment in Kentucky and tells the story of African-Americans in Kentucky over the centuries. So in part, that's really one of the best case scenarios for these symbols, because, the reason that there's so much debate over them is that they exist in public space, right? They're present in the space where we live, and therefore they become both a very prominent defense of some viewpoints, but also a point where differing viewpoints can be expressed and can contest the ones they oppose. So, I like the fact that this debate is ongoing, because I hope all Americans are better understanding their history and asking questions that are very, very resonant today.
Just so you know, my son's a history major, and we've had this exact discussion over these symbols.
And what's his stand?
I'm not going to tell you. I'll let him speak for himself. All right, Dan Vivian, history professor at the University of Louisville. Interesting topic. Thanks for being on, and I hope to have you on in the future talking about some more of this kind of stuff.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks, Dan. Dr. Max Boakye, I want to make sure I pronounce that right, is a spinal neurosurgeon with the UofL School of Medicine, and he's here to talk about a new technology that could improve neurosurgery, or he's going to tell us how it actually does improve neurosurgery. Max, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Yes, Boakye.
Boakye.
You did absolutely perfect.
Okay, very good. I'm glad I could pronounce something right, because I could screw up everything on this show, as we often do. Well, let's talk a little bit about what you do. What kind of surgery do you do?
So I am the chief of the spinal neurosurgery at a university. I do about 60 to 70% of complex spinal surgeries and about 30% of just general neurosurgery.
So when they talk about spinal surgery, is that somebody's got a broken disc or a broken spine, or what is that?
Yes, we do a variety of things like disc herniation or recurrent disc like Tiger Woods had. We also do anterior cervical disc protrusions like Peyton Manning did have. But on a more serious note, we take care of all the complex traumatic injuries that affect the spine and spinal cord. Additionally, we take care of spinal cancers and spinal tumors, scoliosis, where there's abnormal curvature of the spine, and just back pain and neck pain disorders.
Pretty broad spectrum then.
Yes.
So everything from the back of the brain on down. Is that
all the way down to the tailbone.
Okay. Well, fortunately, I haven't had one of those injuries.
Very, very good.
Don't plan to anytime soon, and I certainly don't have a Peyton Manning injury because I'm not that good at football. So, and where did you get your education? Where did you go to school?
I did my medical school at Cornell in New York City, and I did residency training at SUNY Upstate in Syracuse, and that was followed by a fellowship in complex spinal surgery at Emory University, and then a fellowship in spinal cancer oncology at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Center in New York City.
Wow, you've been all over the place. A little bit up in my neck of the woods. I'm originally from Rochester, New York.
Oh, yeah. Upstate New York.
Yeah, you know where Cornell and Syracuse are.
Yes.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about this new technology that's available to folks who are going to have spinal surgery and to the doctors who are treating them. What is it, and what does it do?
Yes, so traditionally, the spine surgery was done what we call the open way, where you make big incisions and you can see directly everywhere, everything that you're doing. More recently, we have this new technology called the Brain Lab Aero, which basically the best way to think of it is like spinal GPS. It allows you to know exactly where you are in the spine, even when you haven't made any incision yet. And additionally, it can allow you to take intraoperative CAT scan images. So frequently in spine surgery, what we do is put screws and rods, especially when the spine is unstable and needs to be supported after a fracture, for example. We put these screws and rods, and we need to know that they are in the right place. And so this technology allows you to be very accurate and precise in exactly where you want the screws and rods to be. And then at the end of the case, you can do a CT scan to really confirm that everything is in the right place, that the spinal alignment is how you want it to be. So it saves the surgeon not only time, but it gives confidence to the surgeon and patient that everything is perfect before you leave.
I'm going to put words in your mouth, and it's not going to be accurate, so let me see if you can correct me here. Is it sort of like arthroscopic surgery where you can watch what's being done inside at the same time as surgery, or is it, you explain to me what I'm looking at? Is it real time as you're operating on my spine that you can see exactly where your instruments are and what you're missing? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so the first part of it is, think of it like, let's say, God forbid, you had like an earthquake in Louisville, all right? And now you're trying to get from point A to point B in Louisville, but there's no road signs or anything to tell you where you are. So this technology is best in revision spinal surgery, where you've lost your normal anatomical landmarks that would guide you to where you need to go. So once you have the technology, you're looking at the screen and you have a wand and you point to anyone on the spine and you look at your screen, it will tell you exactly where you are. So even though your landmarks that you normally would use to navigate a spine is altered by putting it anywhere on the spine. You immediately know where you are. And so as you're doing the surgery and removing the tumor and all of that, it keeps telling you, oh, okay, you've gone this far deep, or you've gone this far to the left or right, And then at the end of the case, once you have your instrumentation, then you can take a final picture and say, okay, I took everything out. I took this much bone out. I reconstructed things in a way. So it's not like an arthroscopic procedure where you're looking and kind of visualizing and doing it. So this is more like guiding you where exactly you are in 3D space. It also helps you make smaller incisions, because if you know where you are, you know precisely, so you don't need to make very big incisions. And the minimally invasive spine surgery allows for much lower blood loss, quicker operating times, and quicker recovery.
So that's the big deal for the patient then. Smaller incisions, quicker recovery. Is that the biggest?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And for you all, it's just having a better playing field, so you know where you're going during the middle of surgery. Correct? Is that the bottom line?
Absolutely correct. You know where you're going. The incisions are smaller. You're more precise. You have to remember about 1 out of 5 spine surgery patients do end up getting surgery again in 5 years because of misplaced screws or rods, wrong.
Wow. I didn't realize
so
that.
This increases the precision of surgery and reduces the rate of future additional surgeries. The University of Louisville has the only one of these tools in town so far, but we think it's a game changer that really helps patients as well as the surgeons. One last advantage of this technology is that normally during spine surgery, surgeons take a lot of fluoroscopy and get a lot of radiation. With this, you just take the initial scan and you're navigating without having to do a lot of fluoroscopy, so it saves radiation to the surgeon and patients.
Gotcha. We're talking to Dr. Max Boacci, who's with the University of Louisville School of Medicine, and he's a neurosurgeon, a spinal neurosurgeon. What are some of the other advances that you've seen in the last few years in neurosurgery?
Oh my God, there's so much advances. It's like every day, I finished training about 2003, and I feel like my knowledge is outmoded. I think in this field of spine surgery, there is a lot of research in developing tools to replace the disc. We now have an artificial disc. So if you have a disc herniation like Peyton Manning, he ended up getting a fusion, meaning they took out a disc and put screws and rods. These days we have an artificial disc, and it retains the normal motion of the spine. There's also a lot of new technology called minimally invasive spine surgery, and that allows for smaller incisions, smaller recovery, less postoperative pain. So there's a new set of technologies that allow minimally invasive approaches to the spine. For spine cancers, we have a new tool called CyberKnife, which does radiosurgery, and it allows for more precise targeting of cancer radiation and sparing of the surrounding tissues.
A lot of new developments, or recent developments anyways, in this kind of surgery.
Yes.
To make it more accurate and hopefully easier on the patient.
Absolutely. And we have a website where we outline some of these new technologies at our...
Yeah, go ahead and give it.
At ULP, neurosurgery spine website. There is a lot of information on up-and-coming new technologies in spine surgery.
Yeah, I should have said you're also a physician with University of Louisville Physicians, ULP, and that's so you got several different hats you wear here, don't you?
Right.
You mentioned the disc. Real quickly as we wrap up, a lot of folks do have disc problems. So what do you tell them when they walk into your office and they say, oh, man, my disc is killing me? What do I do, Max? What do you tell them?
The first thing I tell them is that most disc problems don't need surgery. So in general, we try to do physical therapy and maybe some injections to get rid of the inflammation causing the pain. In rare cases, then we have to do surgery. And disc surgery, depending on where it is usually very successful. So it's a well-treated problem. So there's help around if the problem is persistent. I just want to mention one other thing. I am clinical director of the Spinal Cord Injury Center, and there's many exciting things in spinal cord injury, especially the research in what we call neuromodulation of the spine to try to improve neurological recovery. So that's work that's also available in description at our website.
Right, we've talked to some of the folks in your division about that and had them on the show already. All right, Dr. Max Boache, appreciate you being on. Thanks for coming on today.
You bet, Mark.
Right.
Thanks for being here.
Peter Morin was the director of the Speed Museum of Art for 21 years until 2007, and now he's the director of the Center for Arts and Culture Partnerships at the University of Louisville. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, what does the director of the Center for Arts and Culture Partnerships, which is a really long title,
Right.
What does that mean? What do you do?
Well, essentially, what we try and do is to find ways that the university can be more useful to arts and cultural organizations in the community, and in turn, try and make all those places more a part of the learning of our students. Mark, the resources are just extraordinary. For example, the Filson Historical Society has 1.8 original manuscripts. So there are
1.8 million?
1.8 million. So there are dozens and dozens of doctoral dissertations and master's theses and fabulous undergraduate research projects just within that institution. We have 21 partners, all of which offer our students incredible opportunities to learn. The Speed Art Museum, about to reopen, has 16,000 works of art. So there's just a lot in the community that our students can take advantage of, and we're trying to make all of those institutions more a part of the learning of our students, more a part of the research of our faculty. We're trying to push learning off campus, and we're trying to see how we can be more helpful to all of those places.
So is the idea, at least part of your job, to get more professors to recognize that there are things out in the community at the Speed Art Museum, the Filson Club, like you mentioned, Fraser Art Museum, perhaps, Fraser Museum, and say, make your students or get your students out in those places to learn something? Is that the deal?
That's absolutely the deal. And we raised money for internships so that students who apply and are successful in their application can get 3 credit hours free for internships at many of these institutions. So we have wonderful opportunities for students. Some of these internships have turned into permanent jobs for these students. We have former students now working at the Fraser, the Slugger, the Kentucky Historical Society, among many, many others.
So what are some of the links that U of L has with some of these organizations? Give me some specifics.
Well, there's some great projects ongoing right now. We've got a student at the Culbertson Mansion in New Albany, which has a huge trove of family correspondence from the Culbertsons, who were at one time the richest family in Indiana. And so this young woman is organizing the original correspondence. She's digitizing. She's transcribing. She's going to make these extraordinary letters from the 19th century accessible to a wide audience in a digital database. You can look up and find out about the lives of the servants at the Culbertson Mansion. And that's if you haven't been there, it's a 20.
I have not been there.
It's a 25.
Is it right on the river?
It overlooks the river. It's a 25,000 square foot 1870 mansion with fabulous wall decorations and other things. Then we got an intern at the Filson who's helping Professor Leanne White's work on, she's the director of research there, and she's helping her research illustrations for the Ohio Valley Quarterly, which is the quarterly news, historical journal that they put out with the Cincinnati Historical Society's top flight resource. And picture research is, a very employable skill. We've got another one who's cataloging artifacts at the Muhammad Ali Museum. So
that would be fun.
Yeah, boxing gloves or whatever. So this student is carefully putting those in a catalog so that other people can find out more about them, research them. And I think that will ultimately be online too.
So you got a broad
swath. We've got a wonderful story in one of our students, Kate Sawota, who was an intern at the Kentucky Historical Society in Frankfurt. They liked her a lot. They said, well, we need to get you a full-time job here. So they said, we want you to be our outreach educator. But first, you have to go to 18-wheeler school because she's driving
She needed a CDL license to
She
drive the
needs
big
a
truck
CDL.
around.
There's a history van, which is an 18-wheeler, so she's driving that around, and they've got a feature on their website, the authenticator, pun on her name, and then they got a website, where in the state is Kate? So tell us where that van is going around. So this is a good example of the kind of way in which this program is really actually raising the standards of the practice of curatorship and museum work throughout the state.
We're talking with Peter Morin, who's the director of the Center for Arts and Culture Partnerships at the University of Louisville. Are these things targeted just at students that are in the arts programs, or is it history majors, or who are these students?
Well, it really can work with anybody. We've got a wonderful partnership with Bernheim Research Forest. We've got a partnership with the zoo. We have sometimes we have programs that take us outside of our limited list of 21 partners. We've got a program with Greater Louisville Inc. now where a student is documenting. Last year, 2015, was the year of environment and sustainability, YES, the year of environment and sustainability, and that had a huge impact. Student organizations throughout the metropolitan area did programs on conservation, ecology, sustainability last year. So she's documenting all of that, and the carryover, all of these organizations agreeing to work on one topic has led this year to people's willingness to collaborate on another project. So 33 organizations have signed up for Will in the Ville.
What's Will in the Ville?
Will in the Ville is going to be one of Shakespeare's first folios coming to Louisville, and the University of Louisville is really partnering with the Fraser to organize this, and this is going to have a huge impact.
That's very cool. All right, so what would you tell folks if they're not one of the 21 groups that are currently partnering with the university? I mean, is there an opportunity for folks that are in arts, culture, or maybe not even that, maybe just local businessmen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have, and we're still in the beginning stages of investigating this. We have something called Q, the culminating experience, which is going to come on and be required for all graduating seniors. And a lot of those culminating experiences will be intensive research, laboratory activities in chemistry or biology or wherever. But a lot could also be internships at one of our 21 partner organizations or additional organizations that really fit with what the student is trying to learn and trying to do. And there's some initial new efforts to kind of standardize undergraduate internships, so that'll make things a lot easier as well.
So there are some opportunities for companies or others
absolutely.
that may be in that field to call. What should they do? Call you or get a hold of you?
Call me. Sure, call me. 852-2361 is my number.
Okay. And they can, I assume, get a hold of the University of Louisville if they're looking for a student to do an internship or someone to help them or a part-time job.
So we want to make sure that these internships are really high-powered learning opportunities. So we do have an application process, and it's competitive. But we really guarantee that the internship is a learning process. The interns are monitored. We have meetings with the organization supervisor of the student and with the professor who's supervising the student. So these are, and at the end of the internship in the spring, the students have to get up before the top flight personnel of the partner institutions and make a presentation about what they learned. So the pressure is on for them to really understand, really be able to say what it is that they accomplished.
Great learning experience at the University of Louisville through the Center for Arts and Culture Partnerships at the University of Louisville. Thank you, Peter, for being on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, sit still there for a second because I've got a little bit of trivia that we do this at the end of every show, a little bit of trivia about the University of Louisville. Did you know that the University of Louisville's operating budget is $1.2 billion, of which about $140 million comes from the state of Kentucky and taxpayers? And that's about to go down by about 4.5% over the next year. So that's a little bit of tidbit, $1.2 billion budget for the University of Louisville. Now, remember, you can hear podcasts of all of these programs on SoundCloud and iTunes U. Just search U of L. Don't forget to catch the video of these programs on Metro TV 5 times a week and on KET3 Thursdays at 5 p.m. And I joined Terry Miners and Rachel Platt on Great Day Live on WHAS 11 each Monday morning around 9:30 with some good news or some good news story about the University of Louisville. So that'll do it for U of L Today with Mark Hebert for today. Thanks for listening, and go Cards.